This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
So we're ready in the Shlishis Me'agvala. I want to speak out some interesting inyanim on Megillas Rus. Of course, we know the primary issue that the Megillah deals with is the permissibility of Machlin and Kilyain and Boaz to marry Rus and Arba, because even if a woman converts, there are certain nations that you're not allowed to marry into, even if they do convert, because the pasuk says, "La yavai amani mayavi b'kal Hashem." So there's a shaila: is there a drasha? Is there a halach l'Moshe Sinai that "La yavai amani v'la yamoinis mayavi v'la mayavis"? Well, either way, it would seem that's the central issue. If you're not allowed to marry the females also, then Boaz was not allowed to marry Rus, and David was pasol lavai b'kahal. On the other hand, if there is such a drasha, so then Boaz was allowed to marry Rus, and then David was mutter lavai v'kahal. But this is all assuming that Rus came from which nation? Mayav. When in fact, the first error when it comes to Megillas Rus is Rus did not come from Mayav. B'chlal. No shaykhis to Mayav. So you say, no, she didn't come from Mayav, so where did she come from? Well, she knows she was a descendant of Eglain, a descendant of Balak. Chazal say, then the zechus that Balak erected 7 mizbechos, he was zocheh to have 7 generations of Malchus Beis David. So that means Rus came from Balak. So you say, good, Balak was Melech Mayav. You forgot Rashi. Rashi says, Melech Mayav ba'es hahi. Balak was Menasiche Midyan. Balak was a prince of Midyan. And they imported him. He was not originally Mayavi, he's a Midyani. So Midyan, you're allowed to convert from Midyan. So what's the whole issue? Could Boaz marry Rus? Is David mutter lavei b'kal? Of course he is. Because Rus b'chlal has no shaykhis to Mayav. Rus has no connect. Rus does not come from Mayav. Rus comes from Midyan. It's not true. It's not true. Because the Gemara says in Saita that in Balak's zechus, a Rus came. Balak was not from Mayav. Balak came from Midyan. So that's the kasha. It's a famous kasha of the Maharit in Masechta Kedushin Adaf Samach Zayin. The whole story, everybody got it wrong. Rus doesn't come from Mayav. Rus comes from Balak. Balak comes from Midyan.
No, Midyan, but also for like 7 or how many generations.
So you'll say, well, maybe Balak married a Mayavi woman, but by Goyim it follows the male, it doesn't follow the female. So it doesn't matter what the female side was, it follows the male side. So the only evidence we have that Rus comes from Mayav is that she's a descendant of Balak. That's the only reason why we're calling her Mayaviyah. But she doesn't even come from there. She comes from the what?
Doesn't Megillah call her Mayaviyah?
It's not correct.
Megillah calls her Mayaviyah.
Yeah, well, actually, we pointed out it doesn't call her Mayaviyah too many times. When's the only time it calls her Mayaviyah? When she's hanging out with the men, because she didn't realize that Boaz told her, don't hang out with the boys, hang out with the girls. Okay, but that's a malbum we spoke out 2 weeks ago.
We don't want to say that Balak got his green card and became a citizen, and therefore he's now considered a Mayav.
Okay, so there are a few ways to answer this question. B'chlal, Mayav wasn't always Asar. When was Mayav Asar? At what point in time did Mayav become Asar? When they did not come out to greet us b'lechem u'v'mayim. When did they not come out to greet us b'lechem u'v'mayim? When Balak was their king. So they got stamped with the psul of Mayav at that juncture in time. So since he was the leader, if anything, he got stamped with that psul of Mayav more than the people. He was most responsible for the disqualification. So the Marit says, so he had the psul of Mayav. So he wasn't technically, ethically from Mayav, but he had the disqualification of Mayav since he was mostly responsible for their lack of good character. Or, the Marit says, the other reason why you're not to marry somebody from Mayav is, Asher, what does the pasuk say? Because Asher Sachar Alecha Bilam ben Ba'ar, because they hired Bilam. They hired Bilam. Who hired Bilam specifically? Balak. So if the whole psul is again because they hired Bilam, and Balak was primarily responsible for hiring Balak, Mamela, the psul of Mayaviyah applies to what? Balak. What? Yeah, I mean he's in charge. If anything, they're suffering because of what he did, but the psul that we're giving to Moav is largely due to him, and therefore Rus, who comes from Balak, technically, ethnically, her ethnicity was not Moav, but her character was the disqualifying character of Moav. So this is the kasha of the Marit. It's a famous kasha. So on Shavuos, you could say over at the table, you say, I want to tell you over, famous kasha of the Maharit. Okay, so let me tell you some other interesting inyanim, and that is, if you look at Megillas Rus, every single pasuk begins with the letter Vav, except for 8. There are only 8 psukim that do not begin with letter Vav. Vayimei v'shem ha'ish, vayamas, vayisu, vayamusa, vatakam, vatetze, vatoimer, yitain, in pasuk tes, vatoimerna, vatoimer, shoivna, shin, halohein hey, vatisena, vatoimer, ba'asher beis, vatera, vatelachna. Take my word for it. Ulanami, vatoimer, vatelech, vihine, vayemer, vayan, vatoimer, vayomer, einayach, vatipol, vayan, yishalim. It's basically one long run-on sentence. Yeah, so, who wrote L'chadoidi? Shlomo Kabitz. So, very good. So let's see. So Shlomo Kabitz, he wrote a commentary on Megillas Esther called Manois HaLevi, wrote a commentary on Megillas Rus called Shoresh Yishai, and he points out that every single pasuk in Megillas Rus begins with the letter Vav except for 8. And actually the Yalkut Shimoni points it out to indicate that Rus embraced bris milah that was given in 8 days. Which is also interesting. What do you mean she embraced bris milah? She's a woman. How did she embrace bris milah? Her gerus did not include bris milah. Even her descendant David did not have a bris milah. David was noilad mohol. David was born circumcised. He was born on Shavuos. So what's the inyan of these vavs? Well, the Rav Shlomo Kabitz says the letter vav, what does the letter vav mean? And, in other words, continuation. Meaning every detail of the story, one follows the next. There's a very, very tight chain of events in Megillas Rus. What is the significance of these 8 psukim that do not begin with the letter vav? So, if you look in the Shem HaGedolim of the Chidah, which I recommend that everyone get, it's basically a biography of all the Gedolim that lived before the Chidah, brief biographical information, and every single sefer written before the time of the Chidah with an explanation of what the sefer is. So the Chidah writes in Ois Yud, letter Shin Tzadi Ches, I believe, Shin Tzadi Tes. There is a man by the name of Rabbi Shaya Segal Horowitz, otherwise known as the Avbezin of Prague, and what is he known as? The Shlah HaKadosh. Okay, his name was Yeshaya. So the Shlah writes, if you look in the Seder HaDoros or Rechil Halpern, he found in the writings of a Chassid Reb Lev Mislutsk that the Shlah was the neshama of Rus Hamoyaviyah, and therefore all the psukim in Rus begin with the letter Vav except for 8. And these 8 psukim, I will tell you what they are. These 8 psukim are Aleph Tes, Aleph Yud Beis, Aleph Yud Gimel, Aleph Yud Zayin, Aleph Chaf Aleph, Beis Tes, Beis Yud Beis, Gimel Yud Gimel. What are they? Yud, Shin, Ayin, Yud, Hey, Yeshaya. Beis, Aleph, Hey, says the Seder HaDaros, which is Rashi Tevois, Yeshaya ben Avraham Halevi. Says the Chidah, it's a Ta Sofer because it's not a Hey, it's a Lamed. Beis Aleph Lamed. Beis Aleph Lamed is Rashi Tevois ben Avraham Levi. No comment. That's what he says. That the Shlah HaKadosh had the soul of Rus HaMoyaviyah, and it's even alluded to in these 8 psukim that begin with the letters Yud Shin Ayin Yud Hey Beis Aleph Lamed. Okay, no, it's not in order. But then I don't know if this is camera material. This is all the Sfarim quote this, but they don't quote the next part of the Chidah. Now it says that when Boaz sees Rus for the first time, it says Vayi la face. Literally, it means Vayi la face. He fainted. But that's a very interesting expression, because it says, he laid down at night, and she uncovered him, and all of a sudden he sees her. In the middle of the night, a young girl. By the way, Boaz was no youngster. He was a Zakein Muflag. When I say Zakein Muflag, he wasn't like 80. He wasn't 100. He was 400 years old. Okay, so he's 400 years old. By the way, 400 years old is old. And she's a young girl, and it's the middle of the night, and he sees her. So the pasuk says, Vayila face. He fainted. But the Targum says he turned into a turnip, meaning he became weak like a turnip. Let's see if we can find it quickly. Let's see. A turnip? Yeah, Vayi bachatzi halayla. Vayechrat ho'ish vayila face. By the way, the Medrash says in Tehillim, in Parakuf Yotes, it says, Chatzois laila akum lach lahoides l'cha mishvatei tzidkecha. That David HaMelech used to get up every night at midnight to thank Hashem. What's he thanking Hashem at midnight for? So Chazal say, every midnight, David HaMelech realized that fateful midnight, when Boaz sees Rus, Boaz could have given Rus a klala and she would have dropped dead. We know in the Gemara, if an Amoira gives you a bad look, that's it, you turn to Gal Shalat Samais. So imagine if Boaz would have given Rus a bad look. What are you prutza doing here? You get out of here, you're from Moav, you're Giyoires, you're a nothing, get lost, I'm gonna put you in jail. He could have easily killed her. And the fact that at B'siyata D'Shmaya she was protected, only b'zchus that David HaMelech should come out every single midnight. David HaMelech got up to thank Hashem that Boaz did not curse Rus. But the pasuk says, "Vayecharat ha'ish vayila face," says the Targum, "V'hava b'falgus lalya usava gavra ureseis ve'isrekich kelifsa bisrei." His flesh became soft like a turnip. Well, says the Chida that he heard from an old Rav, a Gadol b'Torah, that the Magid said. Which Magid? No. Now this is the Magid, the Malach, or some ancient Magid. He said to the Chassid Marin Rav Shmuel from Freisdorf, when he lived in Eisenstadt, that Boaz, when Rus came and he fainted, he was Moitzi Kari, Bal Karchai, and from there came the neshama of the Shla HaKadosh, and it's Merumas and the Psukim of Megillas Rus. And it says the Chida, it's known from the Arizal that the neshama of Keri from a tzaddik, Bal Karchai, is the highest darg of a tzaddik. And if that's the case, if you take those 8 letters of Yeshaya, Beis Aleph Lamed, it's Gematria Keri Mi Bayaz. Okay, Rabbi Say, I'm just reporting what he says. Okay. So, weiter, I saw something last night. I couldn't believe it. This is the second time in like a week that I randomly opened up a sefer and they're quoting Reb Pinchas Friedman. So, I actually emailed him last week. So he's coming to town after Shavuos. So he says also, Dvarim Neflam. We know that the whole exchange, the way that Boaz performed Yibum on Rus, is they did Chalipin. And the way the Chalipin worked was that the shoe was removed. So it's quite an interesting idea that the hashgacha was that the geula should come to the world through the removal of a shoe. Like, why did Hashem bring about Malchus Beis David through the removal of a shoe? It would seem to be a rather interesting way to bring about the geula for Klal Yisrael. No, chalipin. So the way they used to do chalipin, v'zois hatu'uda b'Yisrael, the ancient way that you did chalipin was shalaf ishnaloi, the pasuk says. They used the kli was a shoe. So it came out that the method with which they did, that David HaMelech came to the world was through a chalipin, through the removal of a shoe. What's the inyan of the removal of a shoe? Says the Shvilei Pinchas. He brings down the Bnei Yissaschar, not in the Sefer Bnei Yissaschar, in the Sefer Agra de Pirka. And Agra de Pirka quotes a great makobel, the Mishnas Chachamim, the Maram Chagiz, B'Shem the Chachmei Haremez. Now, why do we wear shoes? So what do you mean why do we wear shoes? I can think of a lot of good reasons why we wear shoes. Otherwise, you're going to get calluses on your feet, you're going to get chas v'shalom nails on your feet, glass in your feet. No, that's not the real reason. The real reason is that when Adam HaRishon ate from the Eitz Hadas, he brought klala la'olam. And therefore the earth was cursed. It was arura hadama bavarecha. And he injected poison into the ground. And therefore we don't want to step on the ground because the ground is toxic. It has the toxic poison of the nachash. Masha'in Kain Rabbi saying the Beis HaMikdash, the Chassid Yavitz writes, was free of the sin of Adam HaRishon. That's why there was no death in the Beis HaMikdash. There was no decomposition in the Beis HaMikdash. That's why one of the 10 miracles that happened every day in the Beis HaMikdash was that the basar didn't rot and there were no flies. All of the processes of decomposition did not exist in the Beis HaMikdash. There wasn't decomposition. In other words, people were killed. But in terms of the natural process of the breakdown of man, which was a result of Adam HaRishon, that did not exist in the Beis HaMikdash. Lo ira keri le Kohen Gadol b'Yom HaKippurim. So therefore in the Beis HaMikdash, we didn't have to wear shoes. Or b'makom admas kodesh, what do you do in makom admas kodesh? You take off your shoes, right? Shal na'alecha me'al raglecha. If the makom is holy, you remove your shoes. But that means, why do we wear shoes? Because Adama is injected with the curse of the nachash. That's why Chazal say, la'olam yimkar adam kol ma sheyesh. You should always sell whatever you have. V'yikach min olam l'raglav, to buy a pair of shoes, because shoes are what protect you from the klala of the real poison of the nachash. That's why the most important thing is shoes, and that's why what bracha do we make every morning for shoes? When you wake up in the morning, you open your eyes, Medina de Gemara, you say Pakeach Ivrim, and you stretch out, you say Mater Asurim, and you stand up, you say Zokif Kefufim, and you put your feet on the ground, you say Roika Aras Alamayim, and when you put on your shoes, you say Sha'asali Kol Tsarki. The shoes are considered all the needs of man, because man cannot even get to first base if there's no hefsek between him and the earth, which has the klala of the nachash. And therefore, on the holy day of Yom Kippur, when the Satan is eradicated, Ha-Satan is Gematria 364, he has no shlita on Yom Kippur. You don't wear shoes. So you say, what about Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av is the birthday of Mashiach. Tisha B'Av has in it the seeds of Geula. Tisha B'Av also, we remove our shoes, says the Maram Chagiz, quoted by the Bnei Yissaschar in the Agar de Perka. Memela, says the Shvilei Pinchas, now we understand why the Rebbeinu Shalom orchestrated Malchus Beis David to come to the world through the removal of the shoe. Because the removal of the shoe represents the time, the utopian life, when the sin of Adam HaRishon will be eradicated, when Misa will stop. In fact, David HaMelech his avoida is to bring an end to the Misa that came to the world through the Nachash. That's why David HaMelech did not even sleep, right? David HaMelech doesn't sleep. Why doesn't David HaMelech sleep? Because sleep is the 60th of Misa. That's why David HaMelech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. Because David HaMelech is the antidote to the Nachash, and therefore his creation came about through the removal of the shoe, says Rav Pinchas Friedman. Okay, what else do we got today? Take a look. If you check out your Megillah, if you have one, if you have the Psukim in front of you, you have phenomenon in Megillas Rus that do not appear elsewhere, and that is, you have Kri v'loi Ksiv, that's pretty common, and then you have Ksivs v'loi Kri. You have words that appear in the text, and you don't say them. So that's a rarity. I don't know if you have that in Chumash. I don't think you have Ksivs v'loi Kri. There's words that are there, and you don't read the word. But you have a pasuk like this, that Naomi tells Rus, basically make yourself up, get dressed, and you're going to go to Boaz, and you're going to lie by the threshing floor, and when he wakes up, he'll let you know what to do. So what does Rus say? She says to him, Kol asher taimri elai e'esa. Whatever you say to me, I'm going to do. So the word elai is read, but it doesn't say it. It's not written elai. It's read. But you read it, but it does not appear in the text. So what's going on over here? So the Minchas Shai says that Rus argued with Naomi. Naomi said, dress up, v'rachatzt, wash yourself, asacht, put on perfume, v'sam simlai sayach alayach, and get dressed, and then go down to the threshing floor. But Rus says, well, what am I? I'm a prutza? I'm going to get all dressed up. Everyone's going to see me. Everyone's going to notice me. What happens if somebody else comes and not Boaz? So Rus decided she's not going to get dressed until she's already there. So even though the pasuk says, even though she said the words, Kol asher toimri elai, but it's not written in the Torah. Why? What she meant to say is, you think I'm going to do everything that you tell me? I'm not going to do everything you tell me. I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to do it a little bit more in a modest way. Rabbi said, come to Boaz. So let's talk about Boaz. So Boaz says to Rus that I'll redeem you, I'll marry you, but I'm not the first man up. There's somebody older than me. There's somebody who has first cracks. Pliny Almoini.
How old must he be?
What?
Considering how old Boaz was.
Yeah, good point. You know the story of the guy, the Yemenite Jews when they came to Israel. So there was no documentary on how old they were. So they made claims of 120, 130, 140, 150. They didn't have their... So the story about some guy comes into a life insurance agency. He says he wants to buy a policy. So the person looks at him and he says, how old are you? He said, how old am I? I'm 85. He said, 85, we can't sell you a policy. He said, what are you talking about? My father wasn't here last week. You sold him a policy. He said, really? How old's your father? Father's 117. If I was 117, you sold him a policy? Come on. No, there's no way. He says, check your records. So she checks her records. And sure enough, they sold the father a policy. He was 117 years old. So she said, fine, do me a favor. We don't have time now. You'll come in next week, take a physical. He said, next week when? Tuesday. Tuesday? Can't do it. Why not? I have a wedding. Who's getting married? My grandfather. Grandfather? How old's your grandfather? He's 139. 139. He's 139. He's first getting married. He really didn't want to. His parents are pressuring him to do it. That's the old joke. So anyway, Pliny Almoni was Boaz's brother and Elimelech's brother. They're all brothers. There were 4 brothers. Because since he didn't do the mitzvah, so it's like we don't want to even say his name. Yeah. But some say his name was Im Yigaleh Toiv. His name was Toiv. Some say his name was Toiv. So he's like this. Ulanami moida liisha ishgi barcha mishach zayimelech ushmoi bayaz. So it's like this. Karov ben Achiv shel Elimelech haya Amar Rabbi Seinu Elimelech and Salmoin, the father of Boaz. So Elimelech was Boaz's uncle. So Elimelech and Boaz's father, and Pliny Almoini, and the father of Naomi, were all the sons of Nachshon ben Aminadav. You hear this? They're all the 4 sons of Nachshon ben Aminadav. So you have like this. Aminadav hoiled es Nachshon. Nachshon gave birth to Salma. Salmoin gave birth to Boaz. So Salmoin's brother was Elimelech. So listen to what's going on over here. Elimelech, Salmoin, the father of Boaz, Pliny Almoini. Pliny Almoini was Boaz's uncle. So Pliny Almoini was, pushing 500. And then they're all the sons of Nachshon ben Aminadav. This is not so long after Nachshon ben Aminadav jumped into the Yam Suf. The typical lifespan was 120, but these people lived a long time. Okay, so what were we saying? So one second to last thing. So Boaz was born. I don't know. Let's just think for a second. This 1 second. The first base of Megillah had 410 years, and they were in Eretz Yisrael 440 years before the Beis Hamikdash was built. And David didn't even build it. And so now we're like 4 generations before. So Boaz 400 years. Yeah, he could have been born in the Midbar.
If Boaz died the day after
That night.
and then Rus's grandson is David Hamelach,
Yeah.
right, then Lamaisa, Boaz had to be born even before the Midbar. No.
Boaz was Nachshon's grandson. It's pretty amazing.
Probably born after the answer. I mean, we can calculate based on ages.
But, okay, so one last thing. Listen to this. This is Gevaldach. V'ata ki omnam, Boaz tells Rus, and now, ki omnam, ki im goyal anoichi. So now we don't read it that way. We write V'ata now, ki omnam, ki goyal anoichi. I am the goyal. But there's a word that it says, it's ksiv v'loikri. This is a rarity. Ki im, he puts in the word im. So it says im, but it's not read. What do you mean? What's the same Gematria? Aleph Mem. No, im. We don't read it. It says it, and we just leave it out.
The one that you said before, Eli.
Oh, you mean they replace each other? But there are many, many, many of them. There are many kris v'loy ksivs. There are many. There are probably a dozen. But ksiv v'loy kri, there are not so many. So the Mincha Shai says like this. What he meant to say was, look, I'm 400 years old. I would like to marry you and do the mitzvah of Yibam. But to do the mitzvah of Yibam, it requires a union. I'm not sure I could do it. Maybe, if it works out, if I'm able to, but I don't know that I can. But it's not really a topic of conversation. There's not something you want to talk about openly. So it says the word in the Torah. It says im, but we don't say it. It's not nice to mention. It says im, but we don't read it. Lamaisa, there's a beautiful Chavetz Chaim. We'll end with this. Naomi tells to Rus, do me a favor. If you want to know what to do, he's going to let you know what to do. He's not going to waver and say, I don't know, I'll think about it. Because I know, ki im kila hadavar hayoim. I think the last pasuk in maybe Parag Gimel is that Naomi tells Rus, says, V'atomer shviviti arasher tedin echi pal davar ki lo yishkoid ha'ish ki im kila hadavar hayoim. You're not going to have to wait over here. He's going to let you know, adar ya, adar nisht. He's not going to keep you hanging, I don't know, I'll think about it, I'll ask, maybe, let me see. In other words, he's not going to see, let me check the weather, let me check my stocks, let me check this, let me check that. If he decides that he can marry you, he will marry you today. And he did. But imagine if he didn't. If he would have been in Atzel, if he would have said, you know what, the catering halls are cheaper in a different season, or let me wait until I make some more money, or let me wait until the right time, then there never would have been an Oived, there never would have been a Yishai, there never would have been a David. It's because he had this rizos that when he had the opportunity to do a mitzvah, he capitalized immediately, so he was Zoicha, Lenetzach, Netzachim, then Malchus Beis David came from him. Had he wavered, had he waited one moment longer, then he wouldn't have made it to the chasana. Instead of going to the chasana, they would have been driving to his levaya. Instead, first they had the chasana, then he fathered Oived, and then they went to his levaya. But just think about the emotions of Rus on that day. She went from a poor girl from Moav, who nobody looked at, to the wife of the Gadol Hadar, to an almana in one day. But she was Zoicha. She was Zoicha to be Ima Shamach. She was Zoicha to have Dana. So Chavetz Chaim says a tremendous limud of Megillas Rus is that I have the opportunity to do the mitzvah, capitalize. You never know how much of an opportunity you're going to have. Okay, Rabbi Say, Shkayach. Good day.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.